In this episode, we are going to create an AjaxCaller mixin. AjaxCaller will be used to make any Ajax calls to the server. Under the source directory, let's create a new one specifically for the mixins. And within this directory, we're going to create the new one called AjaxCaller.view. And here we're going to start with the script, export default and the object. And here we start with the properties. So props. We are going to start with the action, which will be of the type string, and default value of just a / pointing to the home page. And then method. And method will be of the type string, and default value will be post. So by default, we will be making a request using a post variable. Then data properties, and return an object which will have only one processing, set to false by default. After this, we are going to have computed properties. So computed, and we will also have only one here, endpoint, which will return this action. And obviously from any classes that will use this mixin, we will be able to override this endpoint if we need to point somewhere else. Okay, now it's time for methods. And here we're going to start with make Ajax call. And this method will take two arguments, success callback and the failure callback. And we are going to start by calling the method, the internal method, this start processing Ajax call. We don't need any arguments for this. Let's create this method quickly. And this method, what it will do is simply set processing property to true. And also what we're going to do is create another method which is start processing Ajax call event. And this method will be empty by default, but it will allow us to override this method from any other class. And if we need to trigger an event when we start processing the Ajax code, that will allow us to do it. So this start processing Ajax call event. Then, because we have a start, we also need to have the end. So we're going to start end processing. Actually, stop is going to be better. Start and stop processing Ajax call. And from here, what we're going to do is this processing set to false. And the same way as with the start, we're going to have a stop processing Ajax call event. So let's create this method as well. And again, this one will be empty event method without any body, but it will allow us to overwrite it from any other class. Okay, so make Ajax call. We have start and stop. Then next thing we're going to do is call another method, this make Ajax request. And this method, to this method, we're going to just pass those two arguments that we've been given, so success and failure. But the method itself, this make Ajax request, will, if we just create it right underneath, take a few more arguments. So success, callback, failure, callback. Then we're also going to have data, URL, and method. This way we'll be able to override any properties that we've been given natively to this mixin. So if we need to make an Ajax, two different Ajax calls from a single component, one based on the standard action and method properties which have been attached to the component, and the other perhaps using completely different data URL and methods, then we can obviously override this by using this make Ajax request method. Okay, so here we're going to create a variable first. So let request data, which will be an object. We'll start with URL, which will be URL argument. If it's available, use it. Otherwise, use this endpoint computed property. Next, we are going to go for method. And method, I'm going to put within the brackets method if it's available as an argument, otherwise use this method property, and we need to convert it to lowercase, so to lowercase. After this, we're going to have params. By default, it's going to be an empty object, and data, also an empty object by default. Now what we're going to do is check if, and then array post, put, and patch includes, and we go for our request data and the method property. If this array contains the method that has been passed through as an argument or associated as a property, then that means that we are going to use request data, and we're going to set our data as data, which is sent through as an argument, or simply this request data method. And let's just create this method so that we can actually override this method from any other class that uses this mixin, and by default request data will just return an empty object. So either the data we're passing through as an argument, or just use whatever is coming out of this request data method. So if it's post, put, or patch, it's going to be the data property. Otherwise, if it's get, for instance, it's going to be request data, and this time we are going to override params, and that's going to be the same thing, data or this request data. And after all this, now that we are ready, our request data is ready, we can make an AJAX call. So Axies, it's registered globally. If we go back to our Bootstrap, you may remember we have Axies registered on the window object. So Axies request, and we go for request data as an argument, and then call success callback if everything's fine, and catch any errors with the failure callback. Okay, so now let's use it within our top dialog component. Let's open components, dialogs, and top dialog. First of all, we need to import it above the export default clause. So import AjaxCaller from, and we're gonna go 2 levels up, Mixins and AjaxCaller. And then before our props, we are going to add Mixins property with the array, and then we put our AjaxCaller there and comma at the end. Okay, next thing, if we scroll down to our data properties, now that we are using this AjaxCaller, which has this processing property, we can remove this one from our data properties. That's no longer needed. If we scroll down, let's go down to our make call method. Now from here, what we're going to do again is this processing true. Now we can use the call to this start processing Ajax call, because if we just go back, start processing Ajax call sets this processing to true and calls the method called start processing Ajax call event, which is empty. If we wanted to trigger an event, we could add this method here and just put whatever else we would like to trigger when we start the request. Okay, so from this if statement, if this has URL, that means we want to perform the Ajax call. So this make Ajax request, and here we're going to provide a few arguments. This success callback when the method, when the callback has been successful, then this failure, which we don't have yet. Let's quickly add the method stub, so failure, and this one will take error as an argument. So that was the second callback there, the second argument. Then we have this data, this URL, and this method type. Okay, semicolon at the end of this call. Now let's go and create this failure method. So from within the failure, first of all, this stop processing Ajax call. First of all, because we want to make sure that processing property is set to false. Then we have if error has a response property. Then we go for error equals, and let's create a message here, error code, whatever error code was, space or plus error response status, property, and then concatenating this with within the brackets. Let's just do space here. Within the brackets, we're going to go for error, response, and status text. That's coming from the Ajax response, and concatenated with the closing bracket, so that's going to be our error message. If it doesn't have response, then else error will simply equal error message property. And lastly, let's call this warning event, and let's pass the object with ID being this ID, and then if I just scroll up a little bit, message, which will be this error. Okay, and if we scroll up, let's just see if we have anywhere else this processing manually set. If I just check up here for the clear method, yes, we have still this processing false. Let's use this method call, which was this stop processing Ajax call. Okay, so that's all good. Now let's open our app.js. And again, same as in the previous video, I'm going to duplicate this line, comment the first one, because we're going to get back to it. And now we're going to do another exercise. Again, we're going to have methods, and the methods will be called trigger. And from within this trigger, what we're going to do is use event bus to fire an event called top confirm. And here we're going to pass an object. This time it's going to have ID of test button with the message set to testing event handler, and then URL this time we're going to set to home. This endpoint doesn't really exist. Method, it's going to be post, and data we're going to set to say test true. Okay, let's open our index blade, and let's add this button again. So a button type button with class button, and then on click, let's call this trigger method trigger. Let's now recompile all the assets. So npm run dev, and let's now open the browser, refresh the page. Again, we have this trigger button. If we click on that button, I click on no for the time being. Let's open the console. Let's see what's going to happen. Actually, network tab, let's trigger it. So yes, and there we go. The call has been made. You can see the error code for not found. If we click on that, you'll see we've sent it to the endpoint that we've specified, this /home, with the post method and with the data test true, exactly what we put within our request. So if we go back, let's just clean it up a little bit. Let's remove this button again. We don't need it. That was just a test. Save and close it. Let's reverse all this back to what it was. And we can now close it. We can close stop dialog, which is now completed as well. Now with the AjaxCaller, I'm thinking that this request data could probably do better if it was a computed property. So let's cut this and paste it into the computed properties. Again, we can overwrite it from any other class that will be using this mixing. And now obviously if we scroll down this request data, rather than calling it as a method, let's call it as a computed property by removing those brackets at the end. Okay, now if we save it and close it, and we can move to the next video.